Imagine a young woman stepping into the lion's den, the royal court of Tudor England, and doing the unthinkable. She publicly challenged the king's entire religious doctrine. This wasn't a mistake or a drunken boast. It was a deliberate, educated act of high-stakes rebellion. Was she history's most audacious heretic, or the first modern martyr? This is the forgotten story of an Askew, the only woman ever tortured on the rack in the Tower of London under Henry VIII. Stay tuned, because the true ending of her interrogation is horrific, unprecedented, and changed the rules of power forever. Before we dive into the burning core of Tudor politics, make sure to subscribe for more untold history. And while you're at it, let us know in the comments which city you're watching from, so we can see where our history fans live. Born around 1521, and Askew was not born into nobility, but into the landed gentry of Lincolnshire, daughter to Sir William Askew, a loyalist to the crown. Crucially, and received an education, a rare and potent gift for women of her generation, but rather than using it for gentle pursuits, and turned her sharp intellect toward a dangerous pursuit, the new, radical ideas of Protestantism. In a period where King Henry VIII had violently replaced the Pope but kept the fundamental Catholic theology intact, Anne's beliefs were not just dissenting, they were lethal. Her central offense? Rejecting transubstantiation, the sacred Catholic dogma that the communion elements literally transform into the body and blood of Christ. To deny this was not just religious disagreement. Under the brutal 1539 Act of 6 Articles, it was an automatic ticket to the stake. Her defiance was loud and clear. "I would rather consume 5 lines from the Bible than attend 5 Catholic masses," she stated during her first examination. This wasn't passive faith. It was an aggressive challenge aimed directly at the authority of the king, who claimed the mantle of the supreme head of the Church of England. By 1545, her articulate public preaching in London had drawn the focused glare of 2 of the most dangerous men in court, Bishop Stephen Gardiner and Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley. These staunch defenders of the Catholic tradition recognized, and not as a fringe fanatic, but as a genuine subversive threat. She was eroding the very foundation of Henry's carefully constructed religious and political dominance. Adding to the explosive mix, Anne's descent occurred at a moment of intense political paranoia surrounding Queen Catherine Parr, who was secretly sympathetic to the very same evangelical movement and represented, and was arrested, questioned, and briefly released. But the powerful men pursuing her saw a chance to expose and eliminate their rivals at court. They came for her again. This time, there was no bail. The Protestant chronicler John Bale described Anne as a pure virgin in the faith of Christ. This steel conviction would soon bring her face to face with an instrument of exquisite agony: the rack. Below the massive grey stones of the Tower of London, a political interrogation descended into an act of physical violence, so extreme it remains shocking even against the bloody backdrop of Tudor history. And Askew had already faced the courts and been formally condemned for heresy. Normally, that would be the end of the legal process. But her captors, still hunting for powerful collaborators, specifically the women of the royal household suspected of sharing her Protestant views, were not satisfied with mere conviction. Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley and Sir Richard Rich, armed with the authority of the Privy Council, took an unthinkable step. They personally supervised the torture of a condemned woman. This action was not only legally questionable but an extraordinary abuse of power, even by the ruthless standards of King Henry VIII. The rack, known in official records as such, was a medieval machine designed to tear the human body apart slowly, inflicting permanent damage by violently dislocating joints. It was rarely applied to women, and never before with such direct intent to expose high-ranking political figures, and was secured by her wrists and ankles and stretched until the tendons and sockets in her shoulders and hips were brutally dislocated. Her own devastating account, preserved by chronicler John Bale, confirms the political motive. "They did put me on the rack, because I confessed no ladies or gentlewomen to be, in my opinion." She goes further, describing Wriothesley and Rich, 2 of the most senior officials in the realm, as literally turning the torture wheel themselves, until the strength in my arms and legs was destroyed. But an Askew, though broken in body, refused to break in spirit. She gave them no names. Though torture technically violated English common law without a royal warrant, it had become a shadowy, ad hoc tool of Tudor statecraft, usually justified through a hasty political need. And Askew's agonizing silence protected the Queen's supporters and, tragically, secured her place as one of the most remarkable figures to die for her faith. This was the pivotal moment, and Askew was now far beyond a simple case of religious dissent. The brutal session on the rack had entirely shattered the already thin boundary between justice and state-sponsored terror. The inquisitors didn't torture her to confirm her own heresy. They already had a conviction. They tortured her to force her to name names, to betray the high-profile Protestant sympathizers at court, with the ultimate target being Queen Catherine Parr herself. Yet, Anne's iron will refuse to yield. "I had rather to perish," she later recorded, "than to compromise my core beliefs." Her unwavering spirit transformed her from a common heretic into a potent, living symbol of defiance. A figure whose spirit remained intact even after her physical body was ruined beyond repair. When the torturers finally stopped their work, she was hideously broken. She was unable to put weight on her legs. She was returned to her cramped cell, crippled, chained, and clinging to life. Despite the failure of their extreme measure, the court was determined to have the final word. Her death warrant was upheld. The authorities had hoped that the sheer physical agony of the rack would make her obedient. Instead, their grotesque cruelty had accidentally made her a legend. The pain they inflicted on her body only amplified the moral strength of her faith. Torture had failed to extract a single useful name, and now, all that remained was the final, terrifying ritual. A public execution intended, for one last time, to silence the voice of the English Reformation. And Askew, her spine and joints mangled by the rack, could not walk to her own execution. On July 16, 1546, she was transported to the stake in a chair, her broken frame strapped in, but her convictions unbowed. The location was Smithfield, London, a field notorious for its ritualistic burning of heretics. Here, watched by a grim assembly of the realm's nobles, clergy, and common folk, England was preparing to enact its darkest political theater. But this time, the performance was different, and was accompanied by three other condemned men, John Lascelles, John Hadlam, and John Hemley. Yet all eyes were fixed on Anne. She holds the terrible distinction of being the first Englishwoman known to have been both tormented in the Tower and then publicly burned. The horrific details of her ordeal had already circulated in whispers across the capital, creating a macabre buzz. Now, the planned final scene, public, decisive, and irreversible, was about to begin. Unable to stand, she was fastened to the stake with heavy iron chains. Accounts describe a small, custom-built chair or support used to keep her upright. Beneath her, the executioners stacked bundles of bone-dry wood, specifically seasoned to ensure a fast, powerful conflagration. Eyewitnesses testified to her absolute tranquility, describing her as perfectly composed. She reportedly refused one final opportunity for recantation. Bishop Nicholas Shaxton, a former Protestant who had dramatically defected back to Catholicism, was appointed to preach the customary last sermon, and however paid him no mind. Chroniclers note that she remained silent throughout his speech, her lips sealed. Her silence became the most powerful final act of political resistance. A bag of gunpowder was placed around her neck, a standard mercy to ensure a quicker death. As the torch was lowered, the vast crowd stood transfixed. Hold up. If you're finding Anne Askew's resilience shocking, hit the like button right now. Your support helps us uncover more of these incredible, untold stories. In Tudor England, these burnings were not hidden. They were calculated public displays designed to instill terror. Her weakened, suffering body became the focal point of a grim performance meant to expunge heresy from England. Instead of being silenced, the flames only galvanized her legacy. And Askew perished without confession, without betraying her allies, and without ever showing fear. Her own accounts, the examinations of Anne Askew, were immediately circulated among the Protestant underground. John Foxe later enshrined her story in his famous Acts and Monuments, stating she was martyred for the truth of Jesus. The message she sent was simple and earth-shattering. The machinery of the state can destroy the body, but it cannot conquer a sincere soul. Her agony served as an undeniable indictment of England's brutal, unstable religious policy. A regime so violent it created a powerful martyr before the eyes of the nation. At Smithfield, an Askew's suffering was consumed by the fire. But from those very ashes arose one of the English Reformation's most enduring and haunting testaments to conscience. Her torture and execution stand as a chilling reminder of the mortal danger faced by anyone who questioned authority in Henry VIII's court. Her ordeal was not just a personal tragedy but a brutal exposé of the era's fierce conflict over conscience and belief, a moment that revealed both the extreme limits of government authority and the unstoppable power of personal conviction. How do you think these state-sanctioned acts of violence inform our views of justice and freedom of religion today? Comment below. As and herself stated, "I would rather perish than compromise my core beliefs."